going live. We are live on YouTube and Facebook. Good evening, and welcome everyone. Today is April 6, 2021. Welcome to Cannabis Equity Minutes with Cynthia Mompoint. And as usual, just getting comfortable with the fact that we are going to be here regularly bringing information as to what's happening in the industry locally here in Massachusetts and on the national front because it matters. And we need to make sure that the voice of equity is heard and that we see true equity measures taking place and happening and holding folks accountable for that. So tonight, the conversation is going to be pretty brief unless folks have specific questions. However, just want to highlight the fact that Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission has been recognized in various areas for the fact that we do the state of Massachusetts, and if you go to our cannabis platform, offers more data than a lot of other places, access to information about what's happening in terms of who's getting licenses, how many licenses, how much product is being sold, what types of product are very popular. And again, for us, the question is always going to be, what does this mean for equity and why is this important? And so with cannabis equity, we want to make sure that the information that is being presented, one, is accurate, and two, allows for accountability. And if you have seen the Massachusetts Marijuana Social Equity Report that I put out last year, you'll know that there were certain things, data points that need to be included. And we're still looking for that. When you look at the CCC's website now, it's cleaner. The icons are more user-friendly and navigation is more user-specific, which is great. However, when you're talking about what is it that is where's the information that's going to allow us to see, are we seeing movement in equity? We're still not seeing what the level of detail that we need to see. When we talk about the war on drugs and the impact and why we need to even have social equity, why we need to have these conversations, we are looking at specific individuals. We're looking at, hey, how's it going? We're looking at specific populations. And so we want to make sure that we are able to track that the populations who are most affected by the war on drugs are the populations who are benefiting now that cannabis is legalized. And so here it is. We need to see the data as to who's participating in the industry. We want that data disaggregated by race, ethnicity, and it still hasn't gotten to that point. Something else that's been lost in how the data is being presented now is in Massachusetts, when we're looking at who are getting the licenses, we see previously they were talking about the priority status, who received priority status. And if you've been tracking with the Mass Mother Mary crew, we have been highlighting the fact that the industry has been hijacked. It was taken over by multi-state operators. They were given the licenses that really should have been prioritized for equity applicants. And when you look at the data now as it's presented on the Cannabis Control Commission's website, that information isn't even captured. It literally identifies medical dispensaries, those who would have had priority status alongside with equity applicants. It lists them as general applicants. And so the ability to hold the Cannabis Control Commission accountable to and being able to see, well, who are the medical entities or which entities that are licensed and operating now in the state that were granted their licenses through the medical priority status. In order for you to see that, you're either going to have to do a FOIA request or do some digging into some of the public documents that are still available. Whereas they still are giving out the information as to who has earned a license under the economic empowerment status, the DBE status, disadvantaged business, and the SE participant status, the social equity program participants. However, it's important that we hold the Cannabis Control Commission accountable. They need to make sure that the information that they're presenting is accurate, because the public, that's how we're ensuring that we're delivering on the mandate, right? So if we see this and we don't see that it's the medical priority status, that you hear a group of people have raised the flag and say, hey, no, this is not right. When folks go to the website, they don't see this information, then it seems as though it's been corrected, when no, it still has not been addressed. The advantage that was given to people that companies that came in and basically paid to play has not been addressed. We have given solutions. We have the PIES program. You will consistently hear me talk about the PIES program. Why? Because that's a way to hold the industry accountable for its responsibility in addressing and redressing the war, the harms done by the war on drugs. And some will have you believe that there is no responsibility there. Then why are we having conversations about social equity, or why are we having conversations about positive impact? And so when we look at the data and how it's presented, we want to make sure that they're giving us information that we can digest and say, hey, yes, we are actually moving the needle. So what does that look like? What am I talking about specifically? Well, for example, in Massachusetts, on the Cannabis Control's website, they provide information about registered agents, and that information is disaggregated by race and ethnicity. However, what is not made clear is a registered agent can be anyone that is affiliated with a licensed cannabis operation here in Massachusetts. It's not clear how many of those folks are in management positions, how many of those are owners, how many of those are entry level, how many of those are volunteers. And all these details matter when we want to talk about equitable participation across the board. So, another example of information that we need to have more detail on is, so we have these equity programs. We need to know, when we look at the social equity program participants, we still have yet to have that data as to the second cohort. What does that population look like? As it stands, the running belief is that it is actually half and half, white and black, and there has not been a strong push and movement to identify those in the Black community who have been in these communities that have been disproportionately targeted, Black and brown individuals who have suffered the brunt of disproportionate enforcement of the prohibition. And even when cannabis was legalized on the medical level here in Massachusetts, you see an increase in the disparity of arrests. And then when it was legalized, it increased even further. So there are particular populations. This is what we mean by populations. There are particular groups of people that the data and research has already identified as being disproportionately harmed, disproportionately disadvantaged by the war on drugs, by enforcement of prohibition. And yet when it comes to legalization, when it comes to ensuring that everyone has a fair chance, everyone is able to participate equally on the legal side, we do not see that same targeted approach, that targeted outreach for these particular populations. And the other piece that you're going to hear us, again, I've said this before, it talks a lot about, is the medical aspect of it. With the move for recreational, the move for legalization, what is often getting lost is equity in the medical space. When we talk about medical marijuana, how are we ensuring that the communities where the use of the plant has been stigmatized so much that people do stay away from it when it has such powerful medicinal benefits? What about and also the ownership in terms of medical dispensaries and providing access to our communities and ensuring that the access is equitable when we look at not just recreational, but also medical. And so that data needs to be included and provided for the public when we're gathering who are the patients, who are the providers, and because the reason why it matters, you have all these numbers, you have all this data. So why does it matter? Well, in my previous life, I guess, if you will, when I did work in education advocacy, education evaluation, and so forth, we looked at data all of the time. And one of the things that we said was what gets measured is monitored, and what is monitored is done. And so when we're talking about equity and we're saying equity was the flag that was raised and is continuing to be raised as we talk about legalization on the national front, when we talk about what needs to be done, we need to have a way to measure. And so that way, and then we can then monitor and hold folks accountable to say that, yes, we actually have done something to address the harms that we saw, the injustices that we talked about and identified as being so atrocious when it came to the war on drugs and so forth. That folks are still talking about it. Oh, the harms of the war on drugs. Well, where is the equity? Where is the equity on the national front? And where is the equity here in Massachusetts? And I like to talk about Massachusetts, not only because I'm here in Massachusetts, but because Massachusetts has touted and presented itself as being first in the nation for legislating social equity. And so it's important that if we're going to hold that title, that we also model that and show to the public what it is that we should be looking for. What does social equity look like, and how do we hold people accountable? So if you're just joining in, what we're talking about right now is the Cannabis Control Commission here in Massachusetts, how they've launched a new website, and we're talking about the data that is tied to that website, and that how it is that we're going to hold the leaders accountable to ensuring that they're giving us information. Hey, sweetie pie, your shadow is showing up on here. So you want to give me 2 seconds, or you can go up and talk to daddy, okay? Go talk to daddy, and I'll be up once I'm done, all right? Okay, sweetie pie. Thank you. Well, you can give it to me right when I'm done. I'm going to wrap it up real quick, and then I'll be up. If daddy doesn't read you the story, I'll read you a story, okay? You're going to, okay. This information is important, and I'm going to give it to you all by any means necessary at any time. And it's important that we bring cannabis equity minutes to the public. And if that means, I have 4 children, and they're half, 3 of them are young. So mother duty is always going to call. So you guys will just start to know my family a little bit more until I guess we get a studio. So the other piece that the data needs to include is the drug quarry population, who it is that who are the people that are getting the benefits that the state is offering. I was sharing that Massachusetts has made strides and efforts to present itself as first in the nation to legislate social equity. And what does that mean is that in our legislation, there's actually a mandate to ensure equitable participation, and there is an expectation that there are going to be supports provided to ensure that we see participation not just at the level of access, but also ownership. And we have 2 programs. We have the Economic Empowerment Program and the Social Equity Program. And the call to action for the Cannabis Control Commission is that they provide data that will allow us to monitor and measure if they are making movement in those areas. And that would require them to provide data on not just the way that they've presented it in terms of bulk, but also disaggregated, or not in terms of aggregated data, but also in terms of disaggregated data by race, ethnicity. And some may say, well, that's unconstitutional, or we don't want to violate people's rights. Well, when the war on drugs was waged, and when we talk about who were the populations that were harmed the most, it is it's black and brown communities. We are talking about a racial population and folks who were targeted simply because of the color of their skin. And that can't be lost on the community simply for the sake of legalization. Just as important is the measures that are taken to address the harms that were done, because those harms have the trauma, the effects on the individual, the consequences that the individual face in terms of loss of time, opportunity, resource, the effects on the family, destruction of the family in a lot of cases, and the community. All of these things have a cost that need to be accounted for. And so that's what we want to see when we're looking at the data. So when the CCC comes out and touts that, hey, look, we have this new platform that's great. We want user-friendly, accessible platforms, but we also want valuable information so that we can continue to track what's happening with in the area of equity here in Massachusetts, especially again when the rest of the nation is looking at Massachusetts or calling upon people who have played a role on the public front in terms of legalization here in Massachusetts. And when they're calling upon them, we want to make sure that the example that's being set up is something that's going to have value to the community and not just be continued rhetoric. And with that, I'm going to switch gears real quick and just talk about some news that's coming out right now in terms of on the national front. Again, when we talk, we want to make sure we're holding everyone accountable for equity. So regardless if it is your local community dispensaries that are popping up and businesses that are coming into your neighborhoods, or if we see on the folks on the national front who are making headway down in Capitol Hill and making a difference there. Snoop Dogg and Charles Koch, who is a billionaire philanthropist, et cetera, have partnered. And I think it's called the Freedom Alliance. And the goal is to push the conversation of legalization forward. And of course, embedded in that is the language on social equity. And here, I just want to take that opportunity to highlight, okay, here's an example where we are touting social equity, and we want to make sure that the conversation is grounded in equitable measures and actions that will actually effectuate equity. And what does that mean? What does that look like? That means that those who were harmed by the war on drugs, those who lost opportunities because they participate in the same plant that people are making billions of dollars, that they are at the forefront when it comes to the opportunity to now open up businesses to access the plant. And in addition to that, that those who suffered arrests, who were convicted, lost time in our prisons, and dealt with the trauma in terms of their interaction with enforcement, that they're compensated for that. What that compensation looks like is not necessarily for me to define. However, that conversation needs to be had. And after the rhetoric of, oh, for social equity and reinvestment in the community, we are not getting to that level of detail in conversation and making sure that when we say social equity, what does that look like? What does the compensation for ensuring that those who paid a high price for equity are now being compensated because of the value this industry now has now that it's gone legal in 16 states. So let's keep our ears attuned to that, and we'll be back before our regular schedule weekly cannabis news, cannabis equity minutes on Friday. So see you then. Let's see. Just want to make sure I didn't miss any comments or questions. All right. Shout out Canna Righteousness. And I'm going to have to follow up with you. We'll definitely make the effort to follow up with folks in the messages and in the comments if I don't get to it online. But thanks for tuning in. Check back with us this Friday. Have a great week.